social cohesion and mis and disinformation in Jordan, Lebanon, share the insights that we collected from the project that took place from February to last month. To do that, we're going to have a very quick flow of introducing the process, what we did with our participants on the different phases. We're also going to be sharing the outcome of the process, and then we'll have some space for questions and answers to us, the team who've been implementing this project, and we will very quickly close together. The people who will be presenting all of this information today is our Reos team, so Ravenna, Lisa, Nadine, and I. We'll also have Sara Habachi from Porticus, our funder, and we'll all be open for questions, answering your questions in the Q&A session. And for now, I'll give it to Lisa, who will explain a bit the process and what we've been doing for the past 6 months. Lisa? Lisa, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Ines, and thanks everybody for joining us and being with us today. So we'd like to kick off with this quote from Maria Ressa. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, no democracy, and it becomes impossible to deal with the existential problems of our times. And we like this quote because it encapsulates the key concern that this project, the Shared Realities Project, really aims to address. And that's this eroding relationship between truth and trust that's playing out across the globe and the implications that it carries for our futures. Next slide. This relationship between truth and trust is what some people refer to as social cohesion. And that's the relationship of trust and connectedness that really enables a sense of common good across different communities. It underpins the social contract between citizens and government, and it allows societies to deal with difference and conflict in nonviolent and non-coercive ways. Social cohesion is really fundamental to the functioning of a healthy society, but it's facing a new set of challenges and threats today from conditions in which mis and disinformation spread further and faster across vast networks of interconnected channels and platforms, in which they can be micro-targeted to increasingly specific groups and profiles, even individuals, and can be segmented so effectively that different realities can be presented to and experienced by different people. Next slide, please. These conditions play out in the role of they play an important role in the erosion of social cohesion through a pervasive feedback loop that you can see depicted here. And just to kind of recap what that is really quickly, we know that all societies, including peaceful ones, have social tensions. Mis and disinformation build on those tensions, and they amplify the related fears, which can help to erode social cohesion. And then in turn, when social cohesion is weak, we're more susceptible to mis and disinformation, to reading it, to creating it, to sharing it. And that in turn works on our tensions and fears to further erode social cohesion. So that's the loop that we talk about. This feedback loop isn't the only source of mis and disinformation, and it definitely isn't the only threat to social cohesion. But the point is it plays a really critical role in exacerbating vulnerabilities on a global scale to a wide range of existing but also emerging threats, like conflict, like climate change, discrimination, electoral integrity, human rights violations, and others. And obviously this presents serious risks to society. Next slide, please. Sometimes it can feel like these dynamics and the path that they seem to be putting us on are really out of our control, and that there's little that can be done about that. But our impact role with Shared Realities is to work with people in their own contexts to find ways to shift from harmful feedback loops that erode social cohesion and exacerbate those vulnerabilities we just talked about, to healthier loops, which can strengthen social cohesion, resilience to mis- disinformation. And that's what brings us here together today. Next slide. Yeah. So to help shift that loop, Shared Realities is envisioned as a program of work to engage in basically 4 different ways. One, by creating learning opportunities to develop enhanced awareness about drivers, especially those drivers that might be invisible to many of us or unfamiliar, but really which exercise a very powerful influence on driving the loop. By undertaking collaborative systemic processes in different geographies and regions to create new insights about how those drivers play out in specific contexts. And that work together allows us to develop new scenarios for possible futures for societies that are impacted by such dynamics. Also by fostering cross-context learning, such as what we're going to be discussing today. And finally, by hopefully influencing discussions at a global level, but on the basis of local scenarios and insights to direct more global decision-making and conversation. A program like this is needed, we think, because we've recognized that while there are many processes and discussions taking place between experts, often that takes place in their professional silos. And there seem to be fewer processes designed for people, citizens, community members to get a better handle on this complex systemic challenge as it emerges and evolves rapidly in their own contexts. And that's what Shared Realities is meant to address. So in 2023, the first iteration of Shared Realities was carried out in Tunisia, Lebanon, and Jordan through a learning project. And in each of these countries, we undertook the first steps of this process that I just described to lay the groundwork for collaborative learning and action to shift the loop. And the focus of this program was to explore the dynamics of the feedback loop in these 3 contexts through a systems lens that's based on many of the approaches that's practiced by Reos partners all around the world. And this work was carried out with the support of Porticus, and also the collaboration of some key partners and advisors, and we're delighted to see some of them here today. In particular, we want to thank our partners at Internews who have been involved in these conversations from the beginning. The Conscious Advertising Network and the work of Harriet Kingaby in particular. Build Up has been a strong supporter and helped to deliver some of our aspects of the curriculum, which also Internews and CAN did as well. And that's Mira El Mawala, and Sara Un and Shannon Raj Singh, who have been advising and participating in the development of curriculum on data and technology and also a geopolitical threat landscape. So today we're actually delighted to have Sara Habachi from Porticus with us. Sara is the MENA program manager from Porticus. And Sara, we'd love to hear from you about why this type of work is interesting to you in your work at Porticus.
Thank you, Lisa. And I will probably say very similar things to what you just said, which I hope is a good thing, rather than repetition, to reconfirm some quite important points. But I'm really happy to be here because I remember when we used to talk about fake news like it was a joke. Donald Trump is talking about fake news. It's very funny and we used to laugh at it. But that was really just a few years ago. And in that short amount of time, we have seen an enormous industry emerge built entirely on the fabrication of information and its distribution. And at Porticus, we're seeing that this is not just in one sector that we work in or one geography. It's not just on one app. We're seeing it in our work on migration, on our work at climate, on gender, and on social justice issues. It is all around us and it sits alongside fact and not as a nuisance, but unfortunately as a competing force. And in our work at Porticus, we are particularly concerned about how we understand different layers of vulnerability and marginalization. So here, for example, in MENA, what we're seeing in these reports, the complexities of the impact of the living environment, scarcity mindsets, and the reality of that, nuances in language, and of course, gender are so important for us to understand how mis and disinformation works to close the wide and varied civic spaces that are vital to healthy democracies. While simultaneously, they're also working to foster those small bubbles that promote isolation and disenfranchisement. And in every single piece of work that we do and every partnership that we have that works with civil society, that works within communities, this is incredibly important for us. And we're asking ourselves, how can we widen those civic spaces out? How can we support the creation of inclusive and participatory practices? And so we find that this is a topic that we can't disengage from. I couldn't ignore disinformation if I wanted to. In my personal life, in my private and professional life, it's everywhere. what I found so remarkable about these reports and the findings is that what you will see, and it will be told to us today, described as these unhealthy systems in reports on Lebanon, Tunisia, and Jordan, is that so much of what is in there is our current reality, but that reality is not static. So the individuals, the structures, the institutions involved in this disinformation industry are moving fast, and they're innovative, and they are very, very well resourced. So we have to look forward. We can't just keep looking at the concerns of today. We really have to get ahead of the curve. And when we're thinking about our partnerships and our funding approaches, it's really important to us that we're looking forward and strategizing effectively. And as I said, as we look how we can best support our current partners, those that we fund, the people we collaborate with, the people that we want to take with us on this journey to change, we have to look forward with purpose and vision, because this is a vicious cycle that we hope to disrupt through a process that fosters healthy scenarios, to use your language, which I like. And once we know and agree upon what that scenario might look like, it's then on us as an ecosystem to shift the dial. And that's what we're hoping to learn, to start learning through this work. So we're exploring what it means to take a whole ecosystem approach, which is why some people didn't quite understand their role in the system when we first started this process. And that's so important because this impacts us all. So of course, we have to look at transparency and accountability across the groups that hold obvious power. But we also hold some power in the system as individuals, as parts of communities, as knowledge producers, sharers, and dare I say, influencers. So this work slots in very nicely with work that we see in the sector that's working to lobby for increased regulation and platform accountability, that asks for MENA language specific innovations and online protections, that supports high media standards, fact-checking, civic education, that asks for increasing inclusion of tech experts in the NGO world, to name just a few interventions that we see alive and well and pushing for resources and space. And I'm only going to say one more thing, because I think there's more interesting things to come out of the resources, but it's important for me to end on this because the forces of disinformation are so isolating. And convenings like the ones that have happened during this process and that are happening right now today are really, really important in building bridges and creating shared visions for the future. So I really want to thank you for being with us. I'm sure this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I look at this not just as someone that represents a funding institution as part of the philanthropy ecosystem, but also as a consumer, as a democracy advocate, as someone that really believes in freedom of expression and free speech based on the integrity of information and access to information. That really, really is the thing that is going to push us to have thriving democracies and civic spaces. So thank you for being here. I will be around for the whole call to take any questions, any recommendations on what the funding community can do to push forward some of the suggestions that we've seen in these reports is more than welcome. It's very much, I hope, the beginning of a conversation, not the end. And I'm going to hand back to you guys to get to the granular detail of the reports, which is far more interesting. But thank you for creating this space.
Thank you, Sarah. And we're gonna get right to the results and the outcome of our work by hearing first from Nadine, who's going to present to us kind of like insights from how our participants lived this experience. Nadine?
Thank you, Ines. So basically, as mentioned, many participants from Jordan, Tunis, and Lebanon contributed to the conversation. They were representative from different sectors and industries, and that would really enrich the insights when we're thinking of the loop between social cohesion and dis and misinformation. What's interesting across the interview, the group per country, and the regional sessions, participants started to see the connection between the two sides of the loop. And here, as you can see on the screen, what participants said that the process did for them. So from the interview to the country conversation to the regional one. Some said that seeing everything in the same place really is valuable. And it kind of, in the country context, even though there have been analysis before, looking across really helped to break the pattern, seeing the pattern and seeing opportunity how to break the pattern. And also it helped, of course, to have a better understanding of the context, local and regional. And finally, of course, this is a sample of the experience. And finally, this shows how much potential there is for collaboration, not only in country, but across countries. And we did hear them in breakout room and coming in plenary, kind of sharing their insights, saying, hey, let's connect later on together to understand more what you're doing, how you're doing, and collaborate. So now we're going to share with you what are the insights and conversation revealed with Ravenna and Lisa.
Thanks, Nadine. So as was mentioned, when we worked with participants in different contexts, we had conversations and interviews and listened to their insights and kind of collected them together. And then we wanted to look across those discussions to consider commonalities and differences in terms of what stakeholders said about the loop and the experiences and their perceptions in their environments. We had three main things that we wanted to learn from those discussions. The first one was we were curious to learn about how the feedback loop is manifesting itself in people's everyday lives, their own experiences, not necessarily from a technical language or through a specific analytic lens. We wanted to learn what local factors seem to be influencing their sense of resilience or susceptibility to mis and disinformation in their environments. And we were also curious about what areas, if they were shifted, did they think could lead to healthier rather than more harmful dynamics in their contexts. So I just wanted to kind of underscore that the observations that we're going to be sharing with you now, they're not a technical assessment of the dynamics in the region, and they're not an empirically grounded comparative analysis of information ecosystems in these three countries. Our colleagues, some of our colleagues on the call conduct that type of research. This doesn't replace the need or the value of that. It just means to sit alongside and also complement that. Also, a central goal of shared realities is to support stakeholders in gaining insight into how these global drivers are shaping their local dynamics. So the purpose of the discussion today is really to, compare or regard some of the initial observations that they've shared in order to prompt reflection, to inspire direction for further learning and hopefully for further action. So with that in view, I think I'm turning it over to Ines.
To
No.
Lisa, to
To me.
Ravenna.
To me.
To Ravenna.
Yeah. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you what participants' perspectives revealed in this process about the dynamics of social cohesion and dis and misinformation. I'm going to start by sharing how mis and disinformation are influencing social cohesion in the three countries we looked at. I'm going to then talk about what factors across the three countries can be seen to be exacerbating the erosion of social cohesion. So what exists in the context that leads to social cohesion being eroded by mis and disinformation? And that's somewhat different across the three countries, but with also some similarities. And then I'll share what conditions in each country are contributing to a larger spread of dis and misinformation. So to start, how are mis and disinformation influencing social cohesion in Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia? It's fairly simple. Essentially, there is an amplification of existing divisions or differences that's happening in each of these three countries. So that's the first kind. So in each country, in almost any country, there are divisions between people of some kind. And in Lebanon, for example, the main difference that mis and disinformation is exacerbating and making more significant, driving a deeper rift into, is sectarian differences. This is what we see already in the political system, which really institutionalizes those differences, but mis and disinformation makes that even deeper. In Tunisia, there are divisions between regions, between races, and between political perspectives. And that's where mis and disinformation is coming in those three spaces and creating those rifts or those divides and making them deeper. And then in Jordan, it's divisions between religious groups and divisions based on people's country of origin. And so again, mis and disinformation is coming in and making those rifts deeper, wider. I'll describe in a moment what's functioning to make those rifts deeper and wider. But there's also a second dynamic, which is not just existing rifts, but also exclusion. So in each of these countries, there are groups who experience discrimination, who have poorer access to rights. And in each country, mis and disinformation is leading to the further exclusion of these groups, pushing them further to the side and disempowering them further. There are several dynamics that participants described, but one of the ones that was most consistent across all of them and also really elevated to a very high level of importance was that of migrants and refugees. So in all three countries, there's a significant population of migrants and refugees and a phenomenon in which those populations are being scapegoated for the problems of the country, with exaggerated claims being put forward about the numbers of people, about their impact. And this is leading to real and everyday further exclusion of people, inability to get jobs, problems with people in the street, and even violence. So I shared a little bit about what's happening. How do we see this social cohesion being undermined by mis and disinformation, but what's happening? What are the dynamics that are causing that? So there are 6 factors that participants identified that are leading to these negative social cohesion outcomes that I just described to you. And just to remind you, as Lisa said, this isn't everything that is present. This is what a group of people who are living this every day see. So the first is a lack of strong, inclusive shared identity. So as I said, there are these rifts, but participants saw that if there were an inclusive shared identity in this country, this could be a way that, in fact, this mis and disinformation would do less to drive these divisions. In Tunisia, participants described that there's actually a lack of a national identity, and that anything that's there is not inclusive. There was an interesting quote about people really saying, "I don't feel like I belong to this country." In Jordan, there is a shared identity, but it's not considered inclusive. So it's of a certain group of people, but not everybody who's living there. And as I mentioned before, in Lebanon, it's the religious and sectarian divisions that undermine that shared identity. There are also in each country structures that reinforce division. So as I've said already, in Lebanon, it's the sectarian structure of government. That's quite obvious. One that we as the team found a bit less obvious was, for example, in Tunisia, there's a physical division between people because of a lack of infrastructure connection between different regions of the country, which makes it harder for people to know each other, to connect with each other, and to build that shared sense. So there's reinforced division just through the physical structure of the country. There are also structures that reinforce exclusion and disempowerment. So not just the division, but also pushing people to the side. And for example, in Jordan, participants noted that women's rights are not honored or institutionalized in the same way that rights of men are. And so the structure reinforces that disempowerment. The fourth element that participants noted is that there are strong feelings of alienation and disaffection in the countries that are really creating a hunger, actually, for explanation of why things are the way they are. People are looking for an outlet or someone to blame for the current conditions, which feeds their appetite for further division. It's often among unemployed people, but also across all 3 countries, people described youth as being more and more alienated and disaffected. Similarly, and certainly relatedly, are feelings of fear that feed people looking of why things are and a solution and a way that somebody could change things. And so across each country, there were some common fears: fear of scarcity, fear of violence. In Lebanon, participants described just a fear of crisis in general. That's leading to greater willingness to be open to mis and disinformation and to seeing people as other. And finally, there's withdrawal. One of the commonly described phenomena, again, across all 3 countries, is that many people are leaving the country or many people are self-isolating. They're leaving different information platforms, they're withdrawing from political space, they're leaving the conversation. So this is obviously in and of itself not part of social cohesion, it's uncohesive, but it's also narrowing the range of voice that is questioning, that is engaging, and that is creating more inclusive space. Now, in each country, there were also several conditions that participants described that are contributing to the spread of mis and disinformation, that are making it more. As we know, mis and disinformation are always present, but what is it that will amplify the spread of mis and disinformation? So there were four main things that participants identified. The first is information vacuums, in which there is needed information and it's scarce or it's absent. One example of this is in Tunisia. The current government is not sharing proactively, is not engaging in community consultation, and often gives information at the last minute or even after decisions have been made, or doesn't fully explain what's happening. And so people fill in with rumor where they're lacking information. The second is sanctioned mis and disinformation. Again, in all three countries, participants named that the government and other official sources create and share mis and disinformation, which makes the information very sticky. When it comes from an official source, it can be very difficult to challenge. And even more difficult when we look at point 3, when there is a constrained information environment. So in a constrained information environment, the access to the range of types of information or to freedom of speech is limited, which means that it's difficult to question, to correct mis or disinformation. So in Jordan, for example, there's a strong context of censorship, and there are strong norms of self-censorship as well among journalists, which really feeds that context of mis and disinformation growing. And finally, participants noted that in each country, there is a lack of media literacy and critical thinking. While there are some initiatives that are happening in each country that are aiming towards this, largely from the nonprofit sector or civil society, it's still a significant gap where large portions of the population aren't aware of the dynamics of mis and disinformation, how to be critical, and how to stop the spread. So this allows messages to circulate further and faster. And with that, I'll pass to Lisa, who will describe some of the areas where there are dynamics that remain to be explored.
Thanks for that, Ravenna. Yeah, it's really impressive sort of the number of drivers that participants in just these initial conversations were able to kind of detect in their own environments. But as Ravenna was mentioning, there are some things that still remain kind of out of view. And many of the key global drivers that are involved in this complex system are often either unfamiliar or even invisible to many of us because of their highly technical nature and the complicated systems that they're a part of. But of course, gaining a fuller understanding of the systems involved requires getting a view into some of those drivers that might be shaping these local dynamics and finding different opportunities for addressing them. And what we see when we kind of look across the conversations and the data that's been generated thus far are some other opportunity areas. So the first one involves some additional learning that could be generated around information ecosystems. When we look at the discussions that we've had, the comments that were made primarily focus on the supply of information, such as like the narratives and the types of messages that are being created and shared by others, especially institutional actors like the media or the government. And less attention is kind of being given to the demand for that kind of information. And that's a dimension of information ecosystems that help us kind of understand or pay attention to the unmet needs, both informational and otherwise, as well as the key fears that play a real crucial role in shaping the information practices of individuals in their contexts, and therefore play a really important role in driving mis and disinformation dynamics. So I think additional learning and conversation through shared realities approach would be well advised to work with folks on illuminating more of that aspect of information ecosystems. Another area of learning pertains to the information economy. So where there was discussion around the information economy, mostly this focused on like notions of the sustainability of media outlets. So in these initial discussions, there was sort of less attention on the commercial and financial incentives that are created by the information economy in each of these contexts. This isn't to say that that awareness or expertise isn't there. We're just saying that in these discussions, this didn't emerge quite yet. And often the research that's carried out on the information economy really focuses on the global north. And in that context, certainly the information economy is an enormously powerful driver of mis and disinformation. And really no plausible scenario of the future about social cohesion could be developed for the global north without recognition of that particular driver and how it's playing out, especially out of awareness for everyday people like you and me. So further learning, I think, is really needed to understand how this driver is working in other regions for a couple of reasons. One, so that we're not applying assumptions that the way it works in the global north is the way it works everywhere. And two, to ensure that people are not missing a key opportunity area for shifting the loop in those contexts. The other area that was interesting to us is geopolitics or the geopolitical landscape. So here too, of course, this is a region where there's heightened awareness about how geopolitics are playing out around them. But this didn't particularly come up so much in these discussions about social cohesion so much. So it wasn't so much in relation to the dynamics that we're concerned about. Stakeholders identified disinformation tactics or didn't notice or discuss disinformation tactics to intentionally seed distrust and disorder as a possible problem, whether by internal actors or external actors. And no one really mentioned the intentional disinformation dynamics active in their own information ecosystems. And this is important in an area of the world where we know that the information ecosystems have been targeted with coordinated disinformation campaigns. So additional learning to find out what's known about those dynamics in this environment and what isn't would be a rich area for learning. And then finally, we wanted to look at data and technology. So these are absolutely central drivers of the loop. But they only came up a little bit in the conversations with the stakeholders that we engaged. And there were some minor mentions of digital security, different digital platforms, and artificial intelligence. But these mentions were, as I said, kind of limited. And this could be for a bunch of different reasons, including we had a small number of stakeholders that we were speaking to. The particular stakeholders that we were speaking to might not have the expertise relevant. Or it could have been a function of our interview design for sure. But a better understanding of how this driver is playing out in its many different dimensions in each of the participating countries would really provide some crucial information about the similarities and differences, both in terms of the challenges being faced, but also in terms of the potential leverage areas that could be addressed. So those are the areas for additional learning.
Thanks, Lisa.
Sure.
And thanks, Ravenna. As you've mentioned, as Lisa and Ravenna mentioned, the factors that may be exacerbating the erosion of social cohesion and the conditions that contributed along with other areas that could be explored. These factors that are mentioned, based on these factors, we have identified several leverage areas through this process to help shift the loop. Just to clarify, leverage areas are those parts of a system which, if influenced or changed, can help shift the system in a positive direction. So in the context of shared realities, participants were invited to explore which area, if changed, could help shift from a harmful loop between the erosion of social cohesion and mis and disinformation to a more positive one of improved social cohesion and healthier information practice. So in each of these domains, participants from at least one of these countries identified an area which, if shifted, would lead to a healthier loop. So just to note, some recommendation could apply to any or almost any country, or some others just are context specific. So the leverage areas are, firstly, you have advancing shared identity and history. And Ravenna mentioned the example, for example, having a national identity, so kind of advancing towards that, not separating between, depending on religious group, political affiliation, or the history they perceive and the key player they perceive in their history. So kind of working towards an advanced shared reality and shared identity and history. The second point, which is a changing structure that reinforces exclusion. As mentioned in an example, exclusion of migrants and refugees and scapegoating them in some countries. The lack of infrastructure also do affect that exclusion. So changing the structure, for example, even the rule of law that will encourage freedom of expression and improving the constitutional governance. And when we talk about exclusion, we also think of women or youth in different areas of the country. Another leverage area would be advancing feeling of connection, engagement, and agency. And here we're thinking of connection with each other, connection with nature. An example was given about the open park community building too. Another leverage area is the source of fears. So the fear of the other, the system, enhanced exclusion of migrants, refugees, women in specific groups pertaining to different religion or community or area. And the idea here, one I remember from Tunis mentioned, is moving from fear to curiosity. And here, when we talk about addressing the source of fear, we're thinking of youth particularly. We don't want to lose them in some country, they're leaving the country too. Another leverage area is improving the states of information behavior, so allowing freedom of press, expression, and transparency. The leverage area also supporting a healthy information supply, and this is through strong, independent, and transparent media, and maintaining and enhancing information with verification and fact-checking tools. So there are some examples coming up, but of course there's potential to build and develop these platforms and these tools. And finally, the seventh leverage area that showed up is improving education. And when we talk about improving education on dialogue, peace building, media literacy, and ensuring that there's equal access to high quality education for young people and citizens in different areas of each country.
Thank you, Nadine, for the leverage areas. Thank you, Lisa and Ravenna, for presenting all like the basic outcomes from our experience with this process. Now we come to the moment where we can give you the space to ask questions or insights from what we've been presenting. So either questions to us about the process or insights like information connections that you're making from everything that's been presented by Lisa, Ravenna, and Nadine. So if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand. If you don't want to be part of the recording, you can ask the question in the chat. We'll read it out loud and answer it directly. If you don't mind being recorded, you can just raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. You can also ask the question in Arabic if you like. We'll have interpretation. No one has questions?
Hello, this is Nurhan from SMEX. I'm the English editor and we work on reporting and advocacy for digital rights in the MENA region. I just had I'm wondering out loud because I feel like the leverage areas ask us to look very deeply at very structural, infrastructural issues in these countries that are already very drained and depleted, especially, for example, in Lebanon. So I was thinking if we can take, for example, one leverage area that we can realistically begin to work with as civil society and maybe look at how we can, for example, in our work, we work a lot on misinformation and disinformation, and we report on these cases in the WANA region across all Arabic-speaking countries. So how can we like do a better job at that without maybe necessarily having to address some of the more deep-rooted issues in each country, like the sectarian division? I know that there is no way really to move towards a shared sense of identity here in Lebanon or history when our history is not even taught in schools. So how can we realistically address misinformation and disinformation that is really prevalent also in Lebanon from what we experience here? As a first step, like one area of leverage that we can begin to work on right now, what would that be?
So you're asking which of the 7 that we've shared we think would make more sense to start with?
Yeah, exactly. And that would have tangible results over the next maybe 5 years.
Lisa? But you're on mute.
I hope it's okay that I'm going to jump in with a question. That was very a provocative one. So thanks for that. And I'm also thinking about maybe even shifting the frame from countering mis and disinformation, for example, to thinking about the future of social cohesion. And what does sort of shifting the perspective there invite us to look at or address that maybe we don't get to do when we focus on countering mis and disinformation. So I just wanted to throw that into the ring.
Ravenna?
I don't have a proper answer to your question, but one of the things, so for our vision of this program, a next phase would be actually to work doing a bit further analysis at each country level, specifically on those areas that Lisa just noted that haven't come up yet, but then to engage in a collaborative innovation process where we look at actually what are the things that we can influence that will help us be moving in the right direction and help us learn about how to create that influence. I mean, I think you mentioned specifically shared identity and history. One of the things that came up in the interviews that I found quite inspiring was the idea of collective memory work. So the idea that if we are ever going to get to a place where we have some shared understanding and some cohesion, we do need to teach history. And in order to get to that, we need to work on collective memory. And so, you know, I'm not saying that that would be one of the innovations that would come out, but for me, it's that kind of thing where I could imagine a group of civil society actors very effectively engaging in doing collective memory work in many domains, could be in social media, face-to-face, in many different spaces that helps us to build towards the vision that we have that's more long-term, but is tangible, concrete, and also gives a sense of completion and hope as we move forward, which I think you're flagging is a bit missing when we look at those giant leverage areas and like, yeah, we're not going to have a collective identity in 7 years. That's pretty clear. And it's back to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes. Sarah, do you have a question?
No, it's more of a response, actually, because I have a sort of privileged position in that I know what a lot of you that are on this call do. So I have a kind of bit of a bird's eye view, which is quite helpful. And in the same way that, as Ravenna is saying, we don't want to, there is a process that Reos goes through that is incredibly helpful to help people come to collective action and decisions. But whilst we're not getting that process, I would ask us to look at these leverage areas individually, but also collectively, and look at your work as individual organizations, but also collectively. So I know on this call we have people that are working on youth participation, we have people that are gender experts, and we have people that are working on, like SMEX, digital rights, access to information, the same with JOSA. And I really would encourage you to look at what you can do combined together to push those leverage areas. So where can we bring in, and as we were talking about earlier, there's multiple layers of vulnerabilities. Well, we have multiple layers of intervention here of young people, of women, of digital access rights. The work that we do together on telecommunications, for example, that for me feeds so easily into this leverage area of supporting healthy information supplies, of advancing feelings of connection, the role that the telecommunications sector has in advancing communications and engagement, changing structures that reinforce exclusion. Again, we're looking at technology as one of those structures that enforces exclusion, and SMEX does such a good job of countering that. So please, I would encourage you all to speak to one another, because there is, and people have been doing that through this process, and I hope will continue, because a lot of these leverage areas are connected in the same way that a lot of your work is connected. And that's what we mean by that whole ecosystem approach, where we shift and move together according to our own skills and capacities and funding resources and all of those other things.
So maybe we don't have an answer as to where we should start from, but maybe we need to work collectively on the different leverage points, probably in parallel, to push forward. Nada?
Yes, mine is between a reflection and a question. I wonder if fear and insecurity were very prevalent in the how do you say in the answers of the participants in these three countries, because we as civil society or civil society actors we have a very little leverage on giving solutions to this fear and insecurity. It's not only fear of others and social cohesion, but we're talking about real fears of what's happening, will be happening tomorrow. So in some countries, it's this fear and insecurities are more prevalent, and some others less. But this is something that is completely out of our control. So I wanted to know if we can address, how we can address this issue, if we can.
So how can we address the challenge of fear, basically?
Yeah.
That's a big question.
Yeah, because it's direct to all the behavior of the citizens usually.
Very true. I don't know if someone has an answer to that though. Or maybe if you have ideas.
Certainly not. It's because, in fact, we work on social cohesion, we work on peace building, and between a day and another, I mean, something happens and it destroys everything we do. So this is what, when comes this horrible name of resilience comes, that we cannot stand anymore in some countries, and particularly in Lebanon. So I don't know. It's something that's but I wondered if it was common in these three countries.
The fear, the theme of fear,
yes,
absolutely.
Fear and the insecurity.
Absolutely.
I'm
even going to go as far as to say probably every single interview we had included directly or indirectly feelings of fear. But I don't know if anyone, I don't think anyone mentioned any, suggested any solutions for how to deal with it. Probably because we're inside it. But I don't know if anyone else here has ideas on how to deal with fear and insecurities.
I mean, there was some ideas in the interviews, but I guess with the little time, like the open, the connection, the park, kind of bridging the conversation on a systemic level and having a dialogue, along, of course, with how the media influence the information around the other and so on. But I guess with the time left, but it's a great idea and leverage point to maybe discuss for next steps.
Ravenna?
Yeah, I almost hesitate to say anything because I am concerned that it would come across as glib, but I think or like just off. But I think that maybe the leverage area, and I'm actually just looking back at the cross-country report and questioning this domain of it. Maybe the answer is actually how do we continue forward despite fear, rather than actually getting rid of the fear. because I think the fears are real. They're grounded in a reality, and yet we need to continue to move to work. And I think, Nadine, what you were saying about being together, working in collective, and I think keeping hope alive is, it sounds glib and Pollyannish, but it's really very truly an important thing to do, is to remain in some hope despite the fear. So maybe it's not actually, maybe we need to think about how we frame that. Maybe getting rid of the fear is not the thing to do, but figuring out how to move forward.
Yes,
Real and grounded fears.
and one of the participants mentioned, I think I said it earlier, is how to go not avoid fear, understand the past ancestor and intergenerational fear that is manifesting, and how to go beyond it. And she mentioned with curiosity. So it was quite interesting insight, one way.
Thank you, Nada. I think it's a very interesting question that kind of like makes us question a bit our synthesis and analysis of the interviews. We have time for one last question or reflection if anyone has anything to share or ask before we close our session.
I just want to build on the conversation we just had. Hi, everyone. I'm Mila. I'm from Reos. I work with Lisa, Ravenna, and the team. And I guess perhaps it's obvious, but I think what the Shared Realities Project is trying to do is to help people to become aware of how their fear makes them vulnerable to mis and disinformation. So yes, it's about, moving forward in spite of our fear, and hopefully it's also about working on the sources of our fear. But sometimes we're unaware of how our fear is making us, absorb mis and disinformation. And so how can we, with the awareness of our fear making us vulnerable, actually, become more conscious about what information we're allowing in and how we're processing that information, and what stories are we passing on. So how do we, the loop is going to be passing through us. How do we send it in the other direction when it comes at us, when misinformation that's trying to feed off of our fears comes at us? How do we send it in the other direction and say, yes, I have fear, but I'm not going to pass on the mis and disinformation, or I'm not going to be affected by that. I'm going to reverse the loop when this is happening.
Thank you, Mile. I'm going to address, before we close, I'm going to address two things that are in the chat. The first one is Sara left us an event, a link to an event around gender and disinformation in Tunisia, organized by Access Now. So you can access the website to learn more about the event. Thank you, Sara. Abigail, to answer your question, it is going to be available within a month. We'll circulate the reports, the country-specific reports, so the Tunisia-specific, the Jordan-specific, and the Lebanon-specific report, as well as the cross-country report. We will send you links very soon. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you for the questions and for your patience and for listening to the whole process. If you have any questions, you can also email us with any questions that come up later on while you're reflecting on what we've been talking about. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.
I guess, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Sulaiman.
Ravenna, do you want to stop recording? Nadine?
Yeah.